The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the sterile corridors of Memorial Children's Hospital as 32-year-old maintenance worker Jake Martinez pushed his cart through the pediatric wing. His gray t-shirt and work jeans were practical rather than elegant, and his hands bore the calluses of someone who had spent years in honest labor. But what set Jake apart from most maintenance staff was his genuine warmth with the young patients he encountered during his daily rounds. Jake had been working at Memorial for 3 years, taking the position after his military service ended, and he needed steady work to support himself while attending night classes in child psychology. His colleagues knew him as someone who always had time to smile at a frightened child or help a worried parent find their way through the hospital's maze of corridors. That Tuesday morning, Jake was replacing light fixtures in the speech therapy wing when he heard raised voices coming from one of the treatment rooms. Through the partially open door, he could see a well-dressed man in an expensive suit arguing with a woman in professional attire who appeared to be a therapist. "This is unacceptable," the man was saying, his voice tight with frustration and desperation. "It has been 8 months since the accident, and Emma has not spoken a single word. I have hired the best specialists money can buy, and nothing is working." Jake recognized the pain in the man's voice, even through his anger. This was not corporate frustration. This was the anguish of a father watching his child suffer. "Mr. Davidson, I understand your concerns," the therapist replied patiently. "But selective mutism following trauma is complex. Emma has not lost the ability to speak physically. She has lost the emotional safety to speak. That requires time and the right approach." "Time?" The man's voice cracked. "How much more time? She used to be so chatty, so full of life. Now she just sits quietly, and I feel like I am losing her more every day." Jake glanced into the room and saw a little girl, perhaps 4 years old, sitting on a small chair. She had curly blonde hair and wore a pretty white and pink dress, but her posture spoke of someone much older than her years. She stared straight ahead with the vacant expression of a child who had retreated deep inside herself for protection. The therapist was showing Emma various toys and communication cards, trying to engage her in any form of interaction, but the little girl remained, completely unresponsive. "Emma, sweetheart," the man said, kneeling down beside his daughter's chair. "Daddy is here. Can you look at me? Can you say anything at all?" The little girl did not acknowledge her father's presence, continuing to stare ahead as if she existed. In a world separate from everyone around her, Jake felt his heart break for both father and daughter. He recognized the signs of post-traumatic stress in children, something he had studied extensively in his psychology courses and had witnessed during his military service. More importantly, he understood that sometimes the most professional approaches were not what a traumatized child needed most. As the session ended with no progress, Jake watched the man carry his daughter out of the therapy room. The little girl's arms hung limply at her sides and she showed no reaction to being moved or held. "Excuse me," Jake said, approaching the man in the corridor. "I could not help but overhear. I am Jake Martinez and I work here at the hospital." The man looked at Jake with the weary expression of someone who had received countless pieces of unsolicited advice. "I am Richard Davidson. This is my daughter, Emma." "Mr. Davidson, I know this might sound presumptuous, but I have some experience with children who have experienced trauma. Would you be willing to let me try a different approach with Emma?" Richard stared at Jake with a mixture of desperation and skepticism. "You are a maintenance worker. No offense, but I have already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the best child psychologists and speech therapists in the country." "I understand your doubt," Jake replied gently, "but sometimes children respond to people who are not trying to fix them or change them. Sometimes they just need someone who is willing to exist in their world without demanding anything from them." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Just let me spend some time with Emma during my breaks. Not therapy, not treatment, just 2 people, sharing the same space. No pressure, no expectations, no goals, except letting her know that she is safe. Richard looked down at his daughter, who continued to show no awareness of the conversation happening around her. What qualifications do you have to work with children? I am studying child psychology, and I have experience with trauma from my military service. But more than that, I understand what it feels like to retreat into silence when the world becomes too overwhelming. Something in Jake's voice seemed to reach Richard, and he agreed to let Jake spend time with Emma during her regular hospital visits. Over the following weeks, Jake would sit with Emma in the hospital's garden courtyard during his lunch breaks. He never tried to make her talk or respond. Instead, he would simply exist in her presence, sometimes reading aloud from children's books, sometimes humming soft songs, sometimes just sitting quietly while birds chirped in the nearby trees. "You know, Emma," Jake said one afternoon as they sat on a bench surrounded by flowers, "I used to know a little girl who loved butterflies. She would spend hours watching them fly from flower to flower, and she said they were like flying rainbows." Emma showed no outward reaction, but Jake noticed that her breathing had become more relaxed and her posture less rigid. "The thing about butterflies," Jake continued, "is that they start as caterpillars who wrap themselves up tight in a cocoon when the world feels too scary. They stay hidden until they feel safe enough to come out and show their beautiful wings." Week after week, Jake continued these gentle sessions. He never pushed Emma to respond or participate. He simply provided a consistent, safe presence while sharing stories, songs, and observations about the world around them. Richard began staying to observe these interactions, initially skeptical, but gradually amazed by the subtle changes he was seeing in his daughter. Emma's posture became more natural, her breathing more even, and occasionally Jake would catch her glancing at the birds or flowers he pointed out. "Jake," Richard said one evening as they walked to the parking garage, "I have to ask you something. Why are you doing this? You spend your lunch breaks and free time with a child who does not even acknowledge your presence. What do you get out of it?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain something that felt so natural to him. "Mr. Davidson, I get the privilege of spending time with a remarkable little girl who is working very hard to feel safe in a world that hurt her. Even if she never speaks again, she deserves to know that there are people who value her exactly as she is. But surely you hope she will speak again?" "Of course I hope for that. But my hope does not depend on her performing or achieving anything. My hope is simply that she feels loved and safe, and that she knows she has choices about how and when she engages with the world." It was during the 6th week of their daily sessions that the breakthrough happened. Jake was reading aloud from a book about a lost puppy when Emma suddenly stood up from the bench and walked over to where a small bird had landed near the fountain. "Birdie," she whispered so quietly that Jake almost thought he had imagined it. But the word hung in the air between them, the first sound Emma had made in 8 months. Jake's eyes filled with tears, but he kept his voice calm and natural. "Yes." "Emma, that is a little brown bird? He looks like he is taking a drink of water." "Thirsty birdie," Emma said, her voice still barely audible but clearly intentional. From that day forward, Emma began to emerge from her silence gradually and naturally. She started with single words, then short phrases, always in response to something in her immediate environment rather than to direct questions or prompts. The professional speech therapists were amazed by Emma's progress, but Jake understood that the breakthrough had not come from any technique or method. It had come from Emma feeling safe enough to risk communication again. "Jake," Richard said one afternoon as they watched Emma chase bubbles in the garden, laughing and calling out to each floating sphere, "You have given me my daughter back. I meant what I said before. If you could teach her to speak again, I would give you everything. What can I do to repay you?" Jake smiled, watching Emma's joy as she discovered her voice again. "Mr. Davidson, you do not owe me anything. But if you really want to do something meaningful, consider funding a program here at the hospital that provides trauma-informed care for children. Not just traditional therapy, but supportive relationships with people who understand that healing happens in many different ways. You mean hiring more people like you? I mean creating opportunities for children to connect with caring adults who are not focused on fixing them, but on simply loving them while they heal at their own pace. 6 months later, Jake stood in the newly opened Davidson Family Healing Center within Memorial Children's Hospital. The program he had helped design provided comprehensive support for children and families dealing with trauma, combining traditional therapy with innovative approaches that emphasized relationship building and emotional safety. Emma, now 5 years old and chattering constantly about everything from butterflies to her favorite books, had become the unofficial mascot of the center. Her recovery had inspired other traumatized children and shown their families that healing was possible. "Mr. Jake," Emma said, tugging on his sleeve as he prepared to begin his shift, "will you read me the butterfly story today?" "Of course, Emma. But first, do you want to help me water the flowers in our garden?" "Yes. And I want to tell them about the butterflies that are sleeping in their cocoons, waiting to feel safe enough to fly." As Jake and Emma walked hand in hand toward the garden, Richard watched from his office window. The maintenance worker, who had asked for nothing but the chance to sit quietly with a traumatized child, had given his family something that all his wealth could never have purchased: the understanding that love and patience could heal wounds that medicine and technology could not touch. The janitor, who had succeeded where specialists had failed, had taught them all that sometimes the most profound healing happens not through complex interventions, but through the simple act of providing unconditional presence to someone who needs to know they are valued exactly as they are. And the little girl who had wrapped herself in silence like a protective cocoon had